take more of a classical, textual, source-based, discussion in order to get a greater perspective on the what Musar is all about. So that's why I decided to start doing Ethics of the Father. I talked about this last week. And last week we did the first Mishnah. The word Mishnah is like a verse or a statement, and in our book we have 6 chapters, and each chapter has roughly 15 to 20 to 25 different statements, which we call Mishnahs. Last week we did the first Mishnah. I want to read it over really quickly and say a few more thoughts about that, and we'll move on to the second, and hopefully we'll be able to finish the second and the third Mishnah tonight. And thank you, Ed, for the coffee.
Yeah, that's what I was asking last week. What came first, the written law or the oral law? Yeah.
Well, they came in tandem, but it was only written. The written Torah we know is 3,300 years old. Mm-hmm. It's an ancient document, way before the first secular historian Dio Cassius, the year of 500 before the Common Era. So it's a document like no other. Such breadth and such depth and such narrative and such chronicling of a history of a people, and much more so an extant. People. We are the same Jews. We're descendants of the same people that it's talking about in the book, and this is written 800 years before the first secular historian. But this obviously is a much more modern document, but still very, very old. And think about it. How many secular works are there that are more than 1,000 years old that you can name right now? Could you name one more? Could you name a document that was written before, Shakespeare? Not many.
Do you went to
Chaucer, 1300s.
In the Far East, it's the Genji, Tales of the Genji.
Oh, I'm sure there's there are now. We have the Hammurabi Code, right. But remember those things are much less comprehensive than the Torah. The Torah is incredibly comprehensive, incredibly detailed, and fascinating. Fascinating to think about it in a historical perspective.
Even today.
That's exactly true.
That's the thing that is just mind-boggling.
Mm-hmm.
Really.
Mm-hmm.
I have my grandmother's her medical encyclopedia.
Mm-hmm.
She was a midwife in the early 1900s, and she has this book dated in 1889 for recorded in the Library of Congress in 1883. And when you read it, what they know about medicine now, and they were all jumping up and down about being scientific physicians.
And it's totally irrelevant now.
And what they know now is amazing.
What the difference?
Amazing the difference.
And it's interesting that you bring that up, because in here we'll see lessons that were recorded 1,800 years ago, but are as relevant today as they ever were. And
the beginning of this book is, we want to be scientific physicians.
Yes.
It could have been written yesterday. Mm-hmm. The declaration of, we want to stand on science to understand things.
Okay, so let's read the first Mishnah quickly, and we'll see a few more lessons. We'll see the conclusions that we had last week, perhaps a little bit more, and we'll dig deep into the second Mishnah, which is a transcendental one. Moses received the Torah from Sinai and transmitted to Joshua to the elders to the prophets to the men of the great assembly. So we start off this tractate, this book, with a delineation of the transmission of the Torah from Moses to Joshua to 800 years of prophets, Joshua to the elders, 800 years of the prophets, and eventually we read to the men of the great assembly, which is at the beginning of the second temple era. Think of names like Ezra. Ezra is a name that we all familiar with as a Jewish historical figure who is from that time period, 2,400 years ago. So Ezra, think about the beginning of the Greek Empire, a few hundred years later. And we'll talk about that also. They said, the members of the great assembly, they said 3 things. Number 1, be deliberate in judgment. Number 2, develop many disciples. Number 3, and make offense for the Torah. The common theme of these 3 themes is really one. Be deliberate in judgment. When you're about to mete out judgment, you have to be very careful. You have to take your time. You have to be deliberate. You have to go over every angle, every possible scenario. We don't jump to conclusions. Why don't we jump to conclusions? Because if you jump to conclusions, you could very well make a mistake. The first most important principle of jurisprudence, of justice, is not to make a mistake. It's better to not come to a conclusion and say, I don't know, than to say, oh, I do know what it is, and have the wrong answer. Be deliberate in judgment. Don't make mistakes. Number 2, develop many disciples. What's the idea of having many disciples? What's the idea of a disciple? A disciple is a student. It's someone you teach to. When you teach something, you have to make sure you know it really well. If you have many disciples, imagine you're speaking in front of 24,000 people. Right? If you're speaking in front of 5 people, you want to make sure you don't make any mistakes. You don't want to look like a fool. But imagine you're speaking in front of 500 people. How much more carefully do you go over your notes? I know when I spoke at the recent Torch dinner, there were almost 500 people in the room. And I read it over again and again to make sure that there's not one mistake. You know, here's 5 people in the room. I'm not so careful. I still want to know what I'm talking about. But how much more so when there's 500 people in the room? And if there's 5,000 people in the room, if you're speaking in front of a convention, a national convention, how much more careful you are to not make mistakes. We're telling us in the Mishnah, once again, be deliberate in judgment so you don't make mistakes. Develop many students. The more students, the more careful you'll be. The more careful you'll be that you won't make any mistakes. And the last thing, and make a fence around the Torah. Last week we described what it means to make a fence around the Torah. We gave the illustration of putting a protective shield in front of an electric outlet. If you see a child taking a bobby pin or something that conducts electricity and about to put it inside the electric socket, you quickly slap a cover on top of the electric. God forbid, you don't want your child, to get an electric shock. That's a description of someone who wants to take protective measures to ensure something terrible doesn't happen. In Torah, we're instructed to make a fence around the Torah. If you don't want someone to do something bad, you have to prevent them a step earlier. If you don't want a child to stick a paper clip into the electric socket, you put a protection, a fence around that episode for occurring. So too in Torah, we don't want to have any mistakes. We don't want to make any mistakes. If you don't want to make any mistakes, you prevent yourself from coming to a situation where you might make a mistake. We know you're not allowed to cook a meat and milk together. Right? That's a verse in the Torah. Right? You should not cook a meat in its mother's milk. We're commanded to not cook milk and meat together. Now, what about poultry and milk?
Yeah, it's fine.
That's fine.
Yeah.
From a Torah perspective. From a Torah perspective, it's fine. But how plausible is it that if someone sees the rabbi cooking chicken, poultry, with milk, how plausible is it for them to make a mistake? Say, hey, you're allowed to cook milk and meat together. Poultry and meat could look very similar. You take a piece of veal, it's white meat. You take a piece of chicken, in a pot, they could look indistinguishable. So what do we do? So what do the rabbis say? You make a fence around the Torah. We don't want someone cooking milk and meat together. Therefore, we'll make a protective fence not to cook poultry and milk as well.
So it's perception of the wrongdoing.
Well, in this case, it's preventing mistakes. So we see, when they said 3 things, they really said one thing. One thing is that you're a judge, you're a leader, you have to make sure you don't make mistakes. You have to be very deliberate. Make sure you have a big audience, i.e., if you have a big audience, what do? You comb over the idea you're going to share. And lastly, make protective fence. Make sure there's no mistakes. So this is an interesting statement. It's an interesting statement, which is very pertinent to a very minor select group of people. Who is it pertinent to? Judges. How many people here are judges? None. Now, by golly, tell me, if we're going to start a book that's going to talk about ethics. Now, ethics for who? Ethics for everyone. Why would we start, pray tell, why would we start a book talking about ethics with a very important lesson that's directed to a very minor group of humanity, to judges? to prevent them from making mistakes. This is a very critical, it's a beautiful lesson. 3 different ways that the rabbis are telling us to avoid mistakes. But who is he really talking to? Judges, leaders. What does that have to do with us, the plain people, the simple people, the lay people? So I was thinking that in reality, we're all judges. The human condition is one where we're constantly making judgment calls. We're constantly making decisions. Well, what does a judge mean? A judge means someone who has presented with a dilemma, with a situation, and he has to rule one way or the other. Decisions. Humans are different because we can make decisions. Can animals make decisions? No. Animals are bound by instinct. Can angels make decision? No. Angels are not decision makers because they are bound by intellect, right? A godly intellect. All animals and all angels are same in that they cannot make decisions. There's only 2 things, or 2 entities that can make decisions. Humans and God. That's it. That's it. Animals are bound by instinct. There's no way for an animal to go against its instinct. It's not possible. They're programmed to act one way, and they will always act so. Humans are also creatures of instinct, but we have the ability to go against our instinct. Classic example of this is always humans are programmed to survive, survival instinct. That's the greatest of all instincts. Humans will go to great lengths to survive. However, we also have the ability, God forbid, to kill ourselves. How does that work? If we're programmed instinctually to seek survival, how is it possible that humans are able to kill themselves? And humans are the only creatures out of, several million creatures that inhabit our planet. We're the only ones that kill ourselves in great numbers, unfortunately. How's that possible? Do you know how it's possible? Because we were granted something called decision-making, called free will. We have instinct. We have a pre-programmed set of instructions that we follow automatically, right? If I go like this, you're going to blink. Why? Because your instinct, the program to protect the, if someone throws a rock at you, right, you duck instinctually. Why?
That might be.
It's all instinct. We do have instinct, but we also have the ability to go against our instinct. And this is why humans are special. If someone says, why are humans special? I'm going to ask you, I don't eat meat because I don't believe that it's moral for us to eat other animals. That's a very good question someone could ask. And there are a lot of people who are troubled by this. How come we're allowed to eat other animals? And the answer is because we are different than all the animals. We're not just a very intelligent horse or whatever, right? Or ape. We're much more than that. We're a different kind of creature. We're decision-making. We have the ability to make decisions. We have the ability to become great. We have the ability to become the lowest thing, the most immoral, Hitlerian, Stalin, right, Saddam. The list of names go on and on. And that's the human condition. We could be Mother Teresa. We could be people who try to save humanity. We could be people, who dedicate our lives for the community. And we could be people that are dishonest, people that are, that do terrible, cruel, horrible things with, to themselves and their families, their communities, and to humanity. What's the Hebrew word for man?
Adam.
Adam. What is the etymology of the word Adam?
Adam is blood.
Well, Adam. Adam. Where does that word come from? We know that the Hebrew.
Earth. How about earth?
Very good. Very good. So the Hebrew, very good. The Hebrew language is different than other languages because the words describe the meaning of the words. Classic example of that is davar. The word for word is the same word for thing because the word describes what the thing is. Mm-hmm. So the word Adam describes man. What is man? So the Talmud asks this question. The Talmud says, there's 2 different things. that the word Adam means. It can either mean Adameh or Adama. Adameh means I should be similar to God. Man has the ability to become similar to God. On the other hand, man could be Adama, could be earth, the lowest thing, right? The lowest undeveloped, just earth. Scum of the earth, just the lowest thing. We could be similar to God. That's what it is. And the definition of human is that ability to make decisions. Right? What is a human? Someone who could be either Adameh or Adama.
Adameh, what's the letter?
Adameh, like domeh.
What is it? What's the letter?
Aleph, Dalet, Mem, Hey.
Aleph, Dalet, Hey, and Adama
is also Aleph, Dalet, Mem, Hey.
Okay, so there's the same.
But it's pronounced differently.
Okay, Adameh.
So that's the idea. We're here, and we're special for only one reason. Why are humans different? Why are we better? Because we have the ability to make choices. And there's only us and God that can make choices. Animals cannot choose to be good. They cannot choose to be bad. They cannot choose to be anything else than what they are programmed to be. We're different. We're special because we are either Adameh or Adama. We're special either because we choose to be good, or we choose to let our instincts overcome and just become, hedonistic. People who are just instinctually driven. So, if we are decision makers, we are really all judges. And we're constantly making decisions every day. Are we going to become an Adameh, similar to God, or become Adamah? Are we going to just remain, driven by base desires and not develop ourselves into great people like we could be? We are decision makers. And at the onset, at the beginning of this book that's going to tell us all about ethics, we have to recognize that the reason why we're able to ethically improve and become great is because we're decision makers, because we really are judges. I think it's really important. That's why the sages, when they wrote down this book, they started it off with a lesson that ostensibly is only for judges. But when you dig a little deeper, you find that no, it's really for everyone, because we all are, in fact, judges, constantly making decisions, and that is what's going to enable us throughout this entire book to incorporate those lessons and become greater people. So that's the first Mishnah. Let's move on to the second Mishnah. Questions? Any questions? No questions. Okay. Shimon the righteous was among the last members of the Great Assembly. We just finished with the members of the Great Assembly. They taught us 3 lessons. Shimon the righteous, he was one of the members, and he was one of the last members of this Great Assembly. He would say, so he was fond of saying the following: on 3 things the world stands: on Torah study, on the service of God, and on bestowing kindness. So let's try to give a little bit of historical context, like we tried to do a little bit earlier. Who is this guy Shimon the righteous? So obviously we know, like it says in the Mishnah, he was a member of the Great Assembly. Obviously, he was, those were the Knesset, the people who were the leaders of the Jewish people at that time. He was a Kohen Gadol. He was the high priest. The high priest. We know that there are some people who are Kohens, some people who are Levis, some people who are, like me, regular Israelites. And a Kohen is special, unique. They perform many services in the temple. But there is a king Kohen, right? A super Kohen, who is called a Kohen Gadol, the great, or the high priest. And he performs the entire Yom Kippur service in the temple. And he's the only one who goes into the Holy of Holies, right? The epicenter of the temple was a place where the Ark of the Covenant was kept, and he went in there once a year on Yom Kippur, and the entire Yom Kippur service is that we have today is all based upon the activities of the Kohen Gadol, of the high priest, in a temple. There's a very interesting story that we find in Tractate Yoma in the Talmud the page would be 69a. And it says that there were Kuthines, as a member of a certain group who lived in Israel, Kuthines, who went to Alexander the Great. Alexander Mokdon, he's called. Alexander of Macedonia. So this gives you like a picture of when this guy lived, when Shimon the Righteous lived, right? Alexander the Great, right? The great Greek Empire captured all, almost the known world or the civilized world at that time. So he also captured Israel. And these Kuthines, they were lived in Israel at that time. The temple was still, was still active, and the Kuthines, they did not like the Jews, and they came to Alexander the Great. And it says, "There's a group of people, the Jews, and they are rebelling against you. You should come destroy them." So it was a really bad day, whatever. And the Jews found out that Alexander the Great was going to destroy them. Anyhow. So the high priest, the leader of the Jews, Shimon the Righteous, the author of our Mishnah, right, the subject of our Mishnah, he took a group of delegates. He put on his special clothing that were the special clothing of the high priest, and he walked out to greet Alexander the Great. And Alexander's on his horse, and he sees Shimon the Righteous, and he gets off his horse, and he bows before him. And all his advisors and all the people say, well, what's going on? This is the leader of the entire civilized world, right? Alexander the Great, the greatest military strategist. I don't think that's a word. Strategist, thank you. Didn't sound right. And an incredible leader, an incredible personality. He remember, he captured the entire world. He died when he was 33 years old, right? He did all that he did before he died, and his empire was so big that when he died, it had to be broken up into 3 different parts. So he's getting down and bowing down to this rabbi in the funny clothing of the high priest. So he tells his men, I want to tell you that every time I go out to battle, I see an image, and I see an image of this guy, of Shimon the Righteous. And I know that this is what helps me. This is what helps me to succeed in battle. And the Jews tell him, yeah, indeed, in our temple we pray for you. We pray for your success, and we pray for your well-being. So obviously, he not only spared the Jews, but he punished the Kuthines who tried to badmouth the Jews. And the anecdote to the story is that I think Shimon the Righteous told him that in honor of this, all Jewish males that are born in the upcoming year will be called Alexander. And since then, the name Alexander has been a Jewish name. You hear people are called Sender or Alexander. It's a Jewish name ever since the time of Alexander the Great, of this particular episode. So this is Shimon the Righteous. He's the high priest. He is one of the last members of this group called the Men of the Great Assembly, and he was the leader of the Jewish people at the time of Alexander the Great. And what did he say? On 3 themes the world stands: on Torah study, on service of God, and on bestowing kindness. So what does this mean? So there's a few questions here. Question number 1, what does it mean on 3 themes the world stands?
Triangle. It's perfect, stable.
What does it mean that it stands? The world stands.
It doesn't sit. It
Governed
stands.
Governed by?
Yeah.
So there's a dispute among the commentaries. I looked at the commentaries. There's a dispute. According to some opinions, it means these are the 3 purposes of the world. Right? Jewish philosophy is not only the what, it's also the why. It's not only what is the purpose, it's not only what is the reality, but rather why. What is the purpose? And according to that opinion, according to that particular commentary, what it means in this Mishnah is that Shimon the Righteous is telling us that the world, the end goals of the world are really 3. Torah study, service of God, and lastly, bestowing kindness. That's opinion number one. Opinion number two is that it does not necessarily mean that this is the purpose of the world. Rather, this is the sustainability of the world. What does that mean? On three things the world stands. And if you were to remove any one of those things, a similar way to a tripod, right? If the world is standing on three things and you take one away, what happens to the world? It falls. And this is a tremendously deep, moving, crucial, pivotal idea, I think, in Judaism, and that is that our particular innovation in spirituality. If you were to point to one particular idea that is uniquely Jewish, and our contribution to there's lots of Jewish contributions to theology and philosophy and spirituality. But I think maybe the deepest idea or the most profound, unique idea that's uniquely Jewish is the convergence of the physical and spiritual worlds. Or maybe convergence is not the right word. Maybe the mirror images of the physical and spiritual world. Now, what does that mean? We have a piece of Talmud that tells us. Very strange statement. There is no strand, blade of grass that does not have an angel in heaven commanding it to grow. Right? This is from Chulin 7. Try to take Chulin, page number 7. Every blade of grass has an angel, and the angel commands the grass to grow. Now, what this means, obviously, is a different discussion. But the broad strokes of this idea is that everything physical has spiritual roots. You cannot have something physical that's devoid of spirituality. Other religions teach that there is spirituality and there's physicality. Right? Man is evil, right? God is good, right? Right? Man is physical and God is spiritual, and they're separate things, right? And man cannot change what he is, and the reality of the physical world is that it's evil, and all physicality is evil. That is not a Jewish idea, because we say it's not possible for something to have sustenance unless it has a spiritual spark to it. And there's actually a verse in the Torah. Where is this verse? Ki lo al halechem levad yichyeh ha'adam. I don't know where it is. I just thought about this now. But there's a verse in the Torah. It says that not on bread alone does man live, rather on the will of the Word of God. What that means is, quite literally, we cannot have sustenance. We cannot be sustained only through physical means. If we were to lose our spiritual spark, we're done. The physicality can only be perpetuated, could have life if it has the spiritual spark. So if man, right, were to lose his spiritual spark, his spiritual engine, what would happen to the man? He'd be dead, because the physicality cannot exist without the spirituality. Right? We may call that a neshama. Neshama is a spiritual injection of life into our bodies. Definition of death, separation of soul and body. Why? Because the soul is what's giving the body the ability to live. You take away the soul, there's nothing left. All you have is a heap of bones. And it all dies like that. Everything stops working because there's no more spark. And that piece of Talmud in Chulin is saying even more. Not only does a human need to have a spark to live, animals also have some sort of spark. That's a lower level spark. It's a much lower level spark, but animals also have to have some sort of fragment of spirituality in order to live. Not only that, not only does man and animal have to have spirituality to exist, but even a blade of grass, which does not have even the level of soul required for an animal, much less a human, even a blade of grass has to have some sort of spiritual element that gives it its life. You would take that out, there cannot be any life. So yes, everything that's alive has a spiritual source, a spiritual root. Obviously, there's different levels. You take greenery, produce, right? Vegetation. That's a much lower level of a spiritual entity, as opposed to something which is alive, which could walk around, which could procreate, like an animal, is a higher level. And the ultimate level is obviously a human. But that's the idea. The idea is that everything physical has spiritual roots. And that's number one. Number two, if you were to take away the spiritual life of something physical, it were to automatically die. In our Mishnah, we're saying the same idea on a global scale. What were to happen if the spiritual roots, the spiritual spark of the entire universe were to be stopped for a second? What were to happen then? You know what happened? The universe would cease to exist. If, God forbid, for 1 second, for one instance, there was no Torah, there was no avoda, there was no Torah, there was no Torah study, there was no service of God, and there was no bestowing kindness in the entire world, the world would die, similar to removing the soul from a human body, or cutting off a spiritual pipeline that gives life to man, to animal, to vegetation, or to the universe. This is an incredible idea. This is, like I said, it's a uniquely Jewish idea, and it's a fundamental idea, and it's according to many commentators, this is what the Mishnah is telling us. It's telling us what is the spiritual source of the entire world. These three things. And if for 1 second there were to be no Torah study, there to be no bestowing kindness, and there'd be no service of God, the world as you know it would cease to exist. There was a great yeshiva in Volozhin. The mother of all yeshivas was founded in the beginning, or the modern yeshiva was founded in the beginning of the 19th century in a little town in Lithuania called Volozhin. 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 And they had a policy. What was their policy? That at any time of the day or night, there shall always be someone studying Torah. So they had a rotation, right? You have from 3 to 4 at night, and I have from 5 to 6, or, they'd always have a rotation. I don't know whether they did it by day, did it by nights, or they always had a rotation. There was always, at all times of the day or night, 24/7, 365, every day, someone studying Torah in that institution. Why? Because of this Mishnah. Because of the idea that the physical, we're holding up the world. If we're studying Torah, we could be assured that the world will continue to exist.
This sounds so Kabbalah. It sounds so metaphysical.
It's remember, I don't know. I don't know any Kabbalah. I don't know any Kabbalah. Obviously, it's a deep idea, and it's talks about spirituality, which is obviously people confuse that with Kabbalah. Kabbalah, what I consider Kabbalah is things that are hidden. Things that are hidden.
But
this isn't hidden. This is what it says in the Mishnah.
But the things that are available, always linked to things that are hidden, right?
Yes, of course. I agree to that 100%. But I don't believe that anything I told you tonight yet is incumbent on Kabbalah to be true.
What can distinguish the spirit, the soul?
I'm sorry?
What can distinguish the soul?
What could distinguish the soul?
What can extinguish it? Cease to exist.
No. The soul isn't. That's not that. No, that's a misinterpretation. The soul cannot be extinguished.
Okay.
However, the body can.
Right.
We're not talking about there's a physical and a spiritual, and they're meshed together.
Yeah.
Right? Now, the soul is eternal. The soul cannot be extinguished. There's nothing you could do. Well, it may happen. There is an idea called kares, a Jewish idea. You could look it up. Kares, which is extinguishing a soul. Does it get fully extinguished or not? But basically, it gets deleted. A soul. How it works? That means you have to come to Kabbalah. I don't know how it works, but in general, there's no such a thing as extinguishing a soul. What does happen, and what I'm trying to describe, is the soul being removed from the body. So the body dies. The body dies. It means the physicality needs the spirituality. The spirituality does not need the physicality. In fact, the soul loathes the body. The soul cannot stand the body. The soul wants nothing less than being put in a physical body, because it's a piece of pure spirituality.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
I have a mother-in-law who's in levels of dementia.
Okay.
As there are people
Yes.
who dealt with this. And you feel like the body and the soul become separate. Because
So long as the person is alive, I believe the soul is still there. It's a good question. I don't know. I don't know the answer, but as long as you ain't dead, you got a soul. Because once again, it's not possible for a body to function at all. It's not possible for a heart to pump and for brain activity to continue, right? Physical brain activity to continue if there's no spiritual entity.
But there's a transition there. I mean, there's a transition between what was and what is.
I don't know if we could say there's half a soul. I don't know. You may be right. You may have to ask someone who knows more than me. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. But a body devoid of a soul cannot continue to exist. That's a good question. I don't know the answer to the question.
That brings me to another question.
Yes.
If the soul is forever,
Yes.
what's the Jewish belief in an afterlife? Does the soul continue in another body after you're gone?
Like a reincarnation.
Yeah. This is a little bit off topic.
Yeah.
But yes, we do believe that the soul, if someone dies, their soul is still intact. 100%. We do believe in resuscitation,
so
right?
If
That's it.
If that's the case, then you're saying if they're not there, as you look at them, this is not the same person.
The
Their
body?
soul, I'm looking at the body, and this isn't the same person. Their soul is still intact, but to be in contact with that soul without the body, or with the body being there but not there.
We believe that it is actually easier to be in contact with the soul after the soul has left the body, because you no longer have the separation of the body. It means a body muffles a soul.
So
Body muffles a soul.
So you
So-
could even say that if we were in tune, perhaps we could be more in tune with the soul visiting the person who's in dementia.
Perhaps. But most certainly
So you would
after someone is, it is easier. This is an idea that's hard for some people to understand properly. But it is easier to maintain a relationship with someone's soul after they're dead than before they were dead, because a soul, when it's submerged in a body, gets muffled. Right? The effect, the influence of a soul has to go through the body in order to be, to exude.
So how would you communicate with the soul if there's no body to transmit what the soul's thinking?
Well, so you don't have to communicate with it, but the idea of being close to someone and someone's soul is, how do you communicate? I don't know. You can't communicate. I don't know. I don't know of any ways to communicate with dead people, at least ones that are sanctioned by the Torah. But the idea of closeness is I don't think is necessarily only via communication.
So what you're saying?
So how would you do it? That's another good question. But that's a good question. And remember, this is a little bit off topic. But with regards to your question, Ed, yeah, most certainly, we do believe that the soul continues, and there's nothing that can be done to destroy a soul.
I have a question.
And we do believe in resuscitation. Yes.
How do you explain?
And we do believe in reincarnation.
How do you explain the differences then between evil people who also have a soul
Well, that's the whole point. Remember we said Adam is Adameh, because everyone has a choice. Humans can be evil. Humans can be evil. Yes, humans can be evil, and humans can be selfish. Humans can be bad.
Not the spirit being selfish.
No, it's the ability to choose to favor the body over the soul.
So
And-
the
and
definitions of Adam are Yetzer HaTov and Yetzer Hara.
Well, Yetzer Tov is those things are not necessarily essential. That's a good point because there's a mirroring in other ways besides for body and soul. There's also good and bad influences that we call the inclinations. Right? Those things are not essential. The difference between a body and the Yetzer Ra, right, versus a soul and the Yetzer Tov, is that when we look at essentially what is human is a body and a soul. Human has influences. Those things are external. They're not part of who he is. So yes, those things are similar, that they influence you one way or the other, but they're not essentially who you are. Who you are is body and a soul. Your job is to make sure that your soul influences the body, and your body becomes more soul-like, more spiritual-like, more adameh, more similar to God, and not the opposite, where your uniquely spiritual soul becomes more similar to your body. So that's the definition of human: the ability to take the body and purify it, take the body and make a physical element more spiritual, adameh, more similar to God, and conversely, the ability to take a soul and muddle it or modify it. I don't know the right word, or to sully it with the earth-like elements of the body. I mean, just like it's possible to take a body and purify it and to elevate it, it's possible to take a soul and sully it and to make it dirty and to lower the level of the soul, lower the influence of the soul. And if you take a look at the piece of Talmud in Brachos, chapter Brachos 8a, it talks about death and describes different levels of death. And we know, as we said, death is separation of soul and body. And the best way to die is when your soul and body are in harmony, i.e., your soul influences the body to become more soul-like. So all you have is a soul and a soul-like body, living in perfect harmony. That's a very easy kind of death. As opposed to the most difficult kinds of death is where your body and soul are so enmeshed with each other because the body influenced the soul and sullied the soul and made the soul more body-like. Then to separate the two is very difficult. And it's a very painful death. And the Gemara there describes, piece of Talmud there describes, that there's 903 different ways to die. So what that means, I don't know. But one of them is like, it says the best way to die is like pulling a hair out of a cup of milk. Seamless. Smooth and painless. You take the soul out of the body because they're living in perfect harmony. The worst way to die is like when you have a piece of wool that got stuck in thorns and to try to separate the two. Very difficult. They became so enmeshed, it's very difficult to separate them.
What happens to the soul once it releases? Let's say you are an evil person. Soul of the person dies. Does the soul return to what it once was?
So, being that humans are soul and body, so the ultimate punishment and ultimate reward cannot be done to the soul without the body or the body without the soul. So when you die, one of three things can happen to you, to your soul. Right, your body gets buried. Obviously, Judaism we don't believe in cremation. It's a very bad thing to do in Judaism. We don't destroy the body because we're going to need the body again. Your body gets buried, and it sits there waiting to be revived with tchiyat hametim, with resuscitation of the dead. What happens to your soul? One of three things can happen to it. Either it'll have to go through a power wash. Either it'll have to go through what's known as Gehenom, right? A purgatory. It was sullied. It was ruined. It needs to be cleaned. Okay? Or it's perfectly clean and nothing needs to happen to it. Or it needs to be reinserted into another body because it totally didn't accomplish its mission. That's what we call reincarnation. Now, let's say a soul is in perfect condition, right? Pristine, mint condition. what happens to it? It gets placed it gets put in a place called Gan Eden or the Garden of Eden, which is what I call a glorified waiting room. It means it's a very pleasant place to be, but it's not the ultimate destination. It's a very fun waiting room, but the ultimate thing is on planet Earth, where the soul gets reinserted in the body, and then the reward and punishment is meted out. Yeah? So that's what happens when
the soul cannot be inherently evil or inherently good.
Well, the soul can.
The soul that inhabited Hitler could be in somebody else now and not be a bad person.
Actually, not. So like I said, it's possible for a soul to get extinguished, and that is what's called charis, which is where Hitler's soul is not in use anymore. It wasn't in anyone else's body. It means when a soul is so corrupt and so perverted and so evil that it's beyond repair. And then
That's soul is buried, extinguished. Number 2, soul is power washed and clean. Soul is perfectly clean, and then soul is inserted in another body.
Exactly.
Now,
One of 4
so
things.
what happens to the soul that gets power washed and clean? Does it get sent out?
So
again, or-
we don't believe in eternal hell, right? It's after it gets power washed and clean, it goes to the same glorified waiting room as everyone else.
Okay, so there's a glorified waiting room.
Yes.
And it's perfectly clean, it's waiting room. And what happens? Who gets inserted into another body?
When someone doesn't accomplish their mission. Souls are here with missions. One of the missions, the mission is to become great people, to perfect ourselves. That's why we're learning Musar, to perfect ourselves.
That sounds similar to Buddhism.
Well, obviously, there are lots of knockoff related. Yes.
One question then. Is this concept so unique of that time? In other words, does any other faith, be it Greeks, Romans, anyone else believe this? Was this strictly a Jewish concept?
Well, not the ancient religions. Like I said, we were the first one to talk about an invisible God, right? The Greeks, or the Romans adopted all the Greek gods, and according to Roman historians, they had 30,000 gods. So, like the whole idea of one invisible, infinite God is a Jewish idea.
But the concept of soul
it's a concept of soul. So, did the Greeks have it? I don't believe the Greeks had it, because remember, the Greeks don't even believe in the same kind of God that we believe in. They don't believe in anything besides for this world. So no, the Greeks certainly did not. The Romans, I don't think. The Romans were just the extensions of the Greek, right? Greco-Romans. The Christians adopted the Jewish Christians and Muslims. They adopted the
Hindus believe.
I don't know what the Hindus really believe. I think they do believe that there's sparks and whatever, but I don't know if it's as organized and clear as what we believe. So yeah, I think they do believe in some elements and the caste system. So yes, reincarnation for sure they believe in, but the different caste systems it's become better. I don't know if they believe exactly what we believe with relation to this.
Keep getting reincarnated until you reach perfection or bond.
Okay. Yes. Anyhow, so yes. So where were we?
We're what?
And then it would be
So like we said,
developing the Torah study, the service to God, and bestowing kindness.
yes, 3 themes that these are the spiritual nourishment of the universe. You stop them for a second. The universe loses its spiritual pipeline, gets cut off from the spiritual pipeline, and it's done for.
Okay, so this is Torah study, service of God, and
Yes. So I want to talk about
Would you underline those in the Hebrew?
That would be Torah, Avoda, Gemilut Chesed. You're welcome. Now, another yes, Ed.
Is that avoda? Is that same as avodah?
It's the same word, Avodah.
Same word. Okay. Now I was only asking because when my daughter was a counselor trainee at camp, they called them avodas. So,
Avodah means work.
okay.
That's what it means. It means work. I translate it as service because it means service for God. Trust me, what? The Labor Party in Israel. Labor Party is called Avodah. Labor. Work. Service. Now, if someone were to ask you from now henceforth, what does Judaism say that's different than all other religions? You'll tell them, what will you tell them? Is that we believe that everything physical has spiritual roots and spiritual pipes that give it life. If you were to cut off something physical, spiritual pipeline, it would cease to exist. That's one thing. That's one area that where there's a convergence of physical and spiritual that's unique to Judaism. I want to say that from this Mishnah, we could really see another area where the physical and spiritual converge and create an idea that's also unique to Judaism. So we said the physical can exist only if it has spiritual pipes. Cut off the spiritual pipes, physical cannot exist alone in a vacuum. There's another idea, which is, I don't know if it's exactly inherent in this Mishnah, but it's the theme, it's the spirit of this Mishnah. And that is that physical need not remain physical forever. Now, what do I mean by that? It's possible for physical to be elevated to spiritual. We believe that when you do something with a proper intention, when you speak, it's a physical activity, correct? But when you speak to God, that's not a physical activity anymore. That's a spiritual activity. It's possible to engage in physical activities, but actually do it to elevate the physical and make it actually spiritual. This is, once again, it's another idea. We are humans. We're physical, but it's possible. Our bodies for sure are physical. But when I'm sweating and I'm schlepping and I'm running to visit your aunt or your mom, I forgot who you said that, right? Your mother-in-law. If I am doing chesed, if I'm doing kindness, if I'm doing mitzvot with my body, is my body physical or is it spiritual? It's spiritual.
Well, I would say, yeah, it's a combination.
No, it means that I could be engaging in physical activities, but really doing spiritual activities. In other religions, we're taught that there's the physical and there's spiritual, and they don't touch each other. They're separate entities, right? The priests don't get married because marriage, right? Sex is a physical activity, right? In Judaism, we say no. The holiest thing that someone could do is engage in sexual activity. The holiest thing. Well, if it's done with the right intentions, right? In the right contexts, right?
I'll be telling you.
Yeah, yeah. No, and that's a true idea sourced all across classical Jewish philosophical texts, and that's because yes, physical activity can be just physical. In fact, it can be bad, but in the proper context with the proper intentions, you can take a physical activity and elevate it to a spiritual plateau.
To stretch your point, you could say exercising at the gym every day could be a spiritual activity because your body belongs to God and you're taking care of your body.
Well,
I know, I don't see it either.
Actually,
I really have a hard time with that.
Actually, what the Vilna Gaon is the Gaon of Vilna, 1720 to 1797. He said it at that exact point. He said it in a similar way. He says it's possible to live an entirely spiritual life because, like I said, the right intentions means when I go to sleep, why am I sleeping? If I'm just sleeping to have a strong body, well, it's not a spiritual activity. But if I'm sleeping in order to have a strong body to engage in spiritual activities, that's, once again, that extends the spiritual activities of the body to even things like sleep and food. You don't like that?
I love it. I totally love it.
No, I think it's
Well, did you ever try this? Whoa, wait a second.
Your point.
Betty, before you lambast this idea, I want you to try it. I want you to go tomorrow morning. You want to eat breakfast, and as you're eating breakfast, first you make a proper blessing on the food, and then you say, and with every bite you're thinking, I'm eating so I should have strength to be a good person and to do what God wants me to do.
Oh, I love it.
If you ever try that and it doesn't work for you, then come back to me and disagree with me. So next week, we'll duke this out. But if you never tried it, you can't climb up to Mount Pius and say, it doesn't work. You have to try it.
okay.
So
this is the place I come to this.
The idea.
It's in the West, we believe that our bodies belong to God, right?
Absolutely.
Because that's why we don't believe in assisted suicide or suicide or that sort of thing. And my mother-in-law comes to me every day and says, please, let's put an end to this, And I said, if you were in the East, you would say your body belongs to yourself, and this could be your deal. But we're in the West, so therefore we believe our body belongs to God, and so we can't do that.
If you were to, I know in Israel, but I think it's like this here as well. Police dogs and police horses are considered like police officers,
right?
And if you were to assault, I don't know why I wouldn't suggest doing this, but if you were to assault a member of the canine, or a horse, it might even be a police car in some places. They're considered like police officers, and it's considered assault on a police officer. And take this as an example. Why is that? Because something that's a tool of the police is like an extension of the police and part of the police itself. Similarly, we look at our body as a tool for our soul. Think of it as a horse and a rider, right? Our rider is our soul to our horse's body, right? The rider is to the horse as the soul is to the body. We look at this as the soul as the horse. We look at the body as the horse of our soul. If you were to assault my police horse, you're assaulting my police. If you were to assault my body, which is my soul's horse, you're assaulting my soul as well. Think of it as that way. If you were to, when you're sharpening your tool, right, you're sharpening an element of what your craft is. If you're sharpening your body, and your body is being used for soul-like activities, it's really a spiritual. It's spiritual. That's the point. That's the point. So yes, it's hard for us to see that. If we're just focused on physical activities, it's hard for us to see our physical activities as being tools of our spiritual reality. But if we were to imagine,
I get the concept. If you really do it for the right reason. In other words, I'm going to sleep so that my body can renew itself to be capable of doing spiritual things. But it's so easy for us as humans to use that as an excuse.
100%.
I'm eating chocolate so that I won't have this craving, and therefore I can concentrate and do God's work. Give me a break. I'm eating
100%. And I want to tell you that one of my rebbes in yeshiva, one of my teachers in yeshiva, he would say like this. He says like this. Let's say you're done, Louis, in yeshiva, the schedules are a lot more, broad than what we're used to. Like when I was in high school, I was in yeshiva till 10 o'clock at night. And then back in yeshiva at 7 in the morning. And when I was in Israel in yeshiva, I was studying Torah all day till 11 o'clock at night. It was awesome. But my Rebbe once said, he says, if you finish learning and you cross around, as we say in Yiddish, when you waste time for an hour and then go to sleep, then you could have learned that hour, could have studied Torah that hour. But you chose to just, waste your time. Now you're going to sleep. Is that sleep a spiritual activity or a physical activity? It's a physical activity. Why? Because what did you just finish? You just finished the physical activity. But now, if I study Torah and then I'm tired, I have to go to sleep. I go to sleep right away. Why am I sleeping? I'm sleeping because I really would have learned. I would have learned throughout the whole night, but I don't have the energy. So I'm sleeping to re-energize myself so I can engage in spiritual activities. So that's an example where if my whole life is that of spiritual activities, then my physical body, that's my tool that I'm using, I recharge it, it's a spiritual activity. So yes, I do believe it can be used as an excuse, and I do believe that this is for the select few who are really living spiritually charged lives. But the idea in theory is true.
No, I get the theory, I get the idea. It's just almost inconceivable that a human could do that. You have to be a special.
so much good work. That's not just for humans, but for animals and for elevating the community. And there's a lot of different kinds of spiritual activity out there. And I would say downtime eating chocolate is getting ready for the next moment.
Yes, I agree. I think you both don't. I think that Roseanne, is that your name?
I'm Roseanne.
Betty. So I do believe
We're both Mrs. Friedman.
I do believe.
Just say Mrs. Friedman.
No relationship.
I do believe that you guys are not really arguing. You both really agree on the principle of the matter. It's just that the way it was described as when someone's living an entirely spiritual life is that being very difficult to accomplish. So in reality, the amount of people who are actually doing this, select few.
But
So
I would
the
say
theory is true, it's just the reality is very rare.
I would say the reality is maybe not as rare as you think.
Well, I know. I was.
If you fragment your life into pieces of, I'm doing a good deed by keeping my car in order, and I'm doing a good deed by doing this, and
it's different percentages of. And yes, we're all good people here, and maybe 60% we're following this. The other 40%, I'm sitting around, I'm watching TV, I'm playing with the puppy,
playing with the puppy would work. Watching TV is
I'm
downside.
playing golf, which, trust me, is a very spiritual thing.
No, I think golf. I think golf is.
on the
No,
golf
I
course.
really think. I'm sorry if you break it down.
Okay,
we all can't be the
I
same
think
Torah
that.
studiers. I think we have to break our lives down into.
But I do think is that you're being probably a little bit too
literal.
exact. And you're being a little bit too flaky about. Not flaky, but too
Flaky?
broad. I apologize.
That's a good
Not
word.
flaky. I apologize. Roseanne, I retract that.
No, you will retract.
I retract it right now.
With a better word.
And I apologize.
Idea is not good.
I apologize.
Fragmented. I will accept the word
Too
fragmented.
accepting. How's it too accepting?
No, how about fragmented? Maybe fragmented.
I
because
hereby
here I am
apologize.
taking care of dogs and making breakfast, and maybe there's fragmentation in there.
Yes, I do apologize for that statement, and I regret it. And I take it back.
I will be torturing you
I
about
withdraw
that
it.
in the future.
No, but I withdrew.
Because
I
that
withdrew
is
it. It's a
totally an inappropriate thing to
5-second
say.
rule, and if you withdraw within 5 seconds, you're good to go. So as I withdrew within 5 seconds, and I even have.
think you withdraw. You said
But
it.
you're not
so-
really wasting your time by doing what you want for that hour, because God wants you to have pleasure.
Well, yes, but God wants you to have ultimate pleasure. Remember, don't settle. I've said this speech before. I spoke here once before that I believe Betty was here. And yes, God wants you to have pleasure, but God doesn't want you to squander your pleasurability on the lowest levels. So yes, it's true.
24/7. You have other pleasure. You have lesser pleasure.
I do believe that it's possible to have ultimate pleasure 24/7. It's very unlikely, but it's possible. And I know people who have it. So yes, I know intimately that it's possible.
But there's only 36 tzaddikim in the world.
Well, perfect to detail. Well, yes, remember that's ready. You're toeing into the Kabbalah sphere, which I don't know that much about.
But you're absolutely right. I'm probably taking it much too,
No, but I think you're actually right.
much too literal.
I was just trying to bridge the gap, but I think you're right.
Yeah.
But I do think that
I'm
it's
more appropriate in giving it a much more elaborate view of understanding we're good people here, and therefore we do good during our day. And even if we
You
feel
haven't seen me on the
guilty,
freeway.
well, there are moments of evil that come up with even the best.
and yes,
Anyhow,
let's
to
Yes.
continue.
yes to continue. I want to say one point. So we know that Torah means Torah studying the Torah. Avodah means service of God. What does that mean? So we know that the sacrifices in the temple were called avodah, which was service of God. Now that we don't have a temple anymore, that was replaced by prayer. Prayer is what's the classical avodah, right? Service of God. What does it mean? Prayer means to talk to God in what language?
Hebrew.
In the language you're most comfortable in. Whatever language you want, whenever you want. There's a major misconception Jews have about Judaism in that it's relegated to the synagogue or to the Jewish center or to some sort of place, location, wearing certain clothes. That's when prayer is appropriate. In reality, prayer is appropriate everywhere, at any time. I want to tell you that I talk to God hundreds of times a day. Hundreds. In what language? I do pray 3 times a day in Hebrew, but primarily in English, because that's the language I'm most comfortable with. And that's what prayer is really about. It means to develop a personal relationship with God via communication. What kind of communication? Verbal communication. In what language? Language you're most comfortable in. Speak to him like you speak to your fellow. The Mesilas Yesharim, right? The famous work of Mussar and philosophy, written in the beginning of the 18th century by Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, known as the Ramchal. He describes prayer which translates to English, like a man speaking to his fellow, and his fellow is hearing and listening. That is what prayer is really about. Speaking to God like you speak to your fellow. The reason why we have prayer canonized and in Hebrew was because people were negligent. People were not fulfilling their duty of speaking to God. And the rabbi said, we have to put a fence around the Torah. And if people are not speaking to God, we have to force them to speak to God. And they have to come to synagogue, and they have to come communally. And if you don't show up, everyone says, where's Wolbe? How come you didn't show up to shul? Right? But in reality, prayer in its essence is man talking to God like you talk to your fellow. Building a relationship with God. Torah study, service of God, building a relationship with God. Lastly is Gmilut Chasadim, right? Engaging in acts of kindness. Looking out what does your fellow need. Caring, worrying about your friend, right? Charity is the first step, right? But much greater than charity is giving someone a loan. Why is that? Because when someone is not doing well, they don't want handouts. No one likes handouts. They want welfare.
Isn't that the 47%ers?
Well, I don't want to engage in that, right? I don't want to talk about that. But you want to give someone and let them save face. Give them a loan. And let him build himself up. Let him feel good about himself, right? You could do kindness with even people that are not around anymore. You can do kindness with wealthy people. You can do kindness with people in your family. It's a worldview of caring for others. Torah, avoda, gimlut chasadim. Torah study, service of God, and engaging in kindness. These are the spiritual pipelines that hold up the world. And if you do these things, what you're really doing, according to this Mishnah, you're holding up the entire world.
Can you imagine if the rest of the world lived like that?
Well, there are lots of people that are doing it, but the people that are doing these things are the ones that are taking responsibility for the entire world. Think about that. Think about how amazing or how great a responsibility and an opportunity it is for us to say the entire world is on my shoulders. And I'm taking responsibility for the world. I'm the one who's ensuring that the spiritual nourishment that keeps the world in existence is steadily flowing. I want to say one more quick point. Is everyone here familiar with the term gematria?
No.
Of course I am.
Well, yes, no, yes. Okay, gematria is the numerical value of the Hebrew language.
Chi is 18.
Oh,
You're
okay.
familiar with
Yes.
Yes. Why is that?
It's
I didn't know the
36.
term.
Yeah, but
I know the
you
concept.
And love is 13, so it's a lucky number.
Now, Avaz, yeah. Now, the way it works is 22 letters in the alphabet, right? And there's an order: Aleph, Bet, right? Gimel, Dalet, right? So Aleph is 1, Bet is 2, right? All the way 1 to 10. 10 to 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100, right? 100, 200, 300, 400. 400 is the last letter, which is a tough, right? Tough, right? So every letter has a numerical value. What's the numerical value of the word Torah, right? How do you spell Torah? No, but in Hebrew. A Taf, Vav, Resh, Hey. This is 400. This is 6. Oh, I'll do it on the board here.
Okay.
Yeah. Can we do? Yeah, Resh, To, Ra. Right? This is 400. This is Vav is 6. Right? Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, 6. Resh is the third to last letter, so it's 200. And what's Hey? 5, very good. So what's the total?
611.
611. Okay, now let's do this. Gimel, 3. 40, 10, 30, 6, 400, like that was 400. 8, 60, 4, 10, 50. Right?
50, right at 50.
That's sorry, 40. Apologize. 40.
Okay.
40 plus 10,
50,
54.
54, 60.
60, so that's
60,
114. 114, correct?
Okay.
Right, 60 plus 4. No, that's not. It's 124. Plus 8, so that's 132. Plus 400, so that's 532.
Okay.
Plus 70, 80, 89. 532 plus 89, so that's 1, 1, 1, 1, 6, 11. Boom, I discovered this myself. I said, wow.
You discovered that yourself?
Yes, I did. I
Wow.
counted it myself. I'm like, wow.
I am very pleased.
Torah, Gemilut Chasadim, right? Torah and kindness, right? Which one is more important? Which one is more important?
They're equal.
They're equal. And I'll and I saw the Talmud, a striking Talmud in Avodah Zarah, Tractate Avodah Zarah. I think it's 18b, and it says like this: someone who engages in Torah study, someone engages in Torah, but does not engage in Gemilut Chasadim, does not engage in loving kindness. Domer kimi she'ein lo Eloka is similar to someone who does not believe in God. Someone can study Torah the whole day, right? Engage in lofty matters of broadening the mind and intellectual activity, right? But doesn't translate that into a worldview where they see others and care for others and worry about others, and doesn't take every step of growth in Torah and make a parallel step of growth in Gemilut Chasadim, that you don't believe in God. Why? Because to believe in God means that there has to be a balance of your Torah growth and your Gemilut Chasadim. Don't think that one's more valuable than the other. And I said, hey, wow. And I just counted the Gematria. I'm like, 611.
So
Both of them are 611. That was my epiphany of yes.
May
And
I
so
share my
let me just finish, and then we'll have questions. So I want to just give a quick recap. So we started off by saying we're all judges.
All right.
What's the value of? Why do we start a tractate on ethics with the discussion of judges? Because we're humans,
Because we're all different.
and we're always making decisions. We're always making judgment calls. We're all really judges, and that's how we improve or regress. Then we saw the next Mishnah, which said, Shimon the Righteous said that there are three things that hold up the world. There's three spiritual pipes that give life to the world. We talked about the idea of physical having spiritual roots. And we talked about what Torah means, what service of God means, and what Gemilut Chasadim means. And another idea that we said is that man who's physical can engage in spiritual activities and elevate the physical. Physical need not remain physical. It could be elevated into the spiritual. Yes, now you can ask a question. Now time for questions.
Okay, well, I was going to say, I do flowers at the temple, and I had Ellie Lyco's flower arrangement, and we were discussing the negative laws as opposed to positive laws in her Torah portion, which you can tell. And it was 365 negative laws and 246 positive laws.
48.
248. Great. So we were trying to get this down into flowers.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea was we, as a general rule, went to 7 to 10. The same ratio, almost perfectly the same ratio as 7 to 10. So there's 7 as the Jewish number and 10 as the 10 Commandments, because the 10 Commandments were in that Torah portion, right? So I did 7 bright colored flowers, light colored flowers on one side, 10 dark colored flowers on the other. So that was my moment.
Very cute.
And I had mathematicians do that talk, and I was trying to get it to like the Greek, what's it called? The golden section, which is 0.67, but it was really 0.62. But really, we went to something very close to that. It was like 0.63 for the 7 to 10, coming off of the ratio from 240 8 to
65.
65. So that's about it. So I did 7 to 10. So
Fascinating.
Are you pleased?
I am.
I'm glad.
Ed,
Yes.
question.
Yes.
You have a question?
No, I didn't have a question. No, but
Jerry, Betty, see y'all next week. And Betty, you have to give me
Do you
some
have an
golf
extra copy of
tips.
this?
Give me some golf
Extra
tips.
copy.
You know what?
I like that.